All right. Hello, Catholic YouTube. And now I have to get into the habit of also saying hello to all of my friends out there on X, the land of X, formerly known as Twitter. Hope you guys are doing well tonight. I'm just looking out of my window here across the harbor, across the mountain, and I see we have a super moon tonight. My son told me it's not a full moon, it's a super moon, which apparently means that all the maniacs and poets will be out tonight. So happy supermoon to you all. I have to drop a little self-promotion here. I need to get into the habit of doing that. I'm really bad about it, but I'm trying to get better. So if you guys would, when you get a chance, please check out my Patreon. We're doing some cool things over there. I have just today released the third of my series into what I'm kind of being a little cheeky when I'm calling it the errors of orthodoxy. Though I do think that there are errors in orthodoxy, this is more like my critical examination of the Orthodox Church as such. And while I try to maintain a sense of humility, a sense of my very small and insignificant place in this space of the online Christian community, I have to say I'm quite proud of what I have put together in this Orthodox series. So far, we've done this Great Schism. I did that in 2 parts. And what just came out today is on the Azymes controversy. And moving forward, I've got some things on the, Caesaropapism, especially around Mehmed II. Then we've got some other really good videos on there as well. We're going to be starting our book club in November. I'm already kind of getting ready for that. We're going to be doing Rebuild My Church. The Peter Damian Fellner on the Ecclesiology and Mariology of Vatican II by Father Edward Andraco. And I think that's going to be a really great work for those of you who've been following me long enough, and you know our interest here is primarily in Franciscan studies. This is going to be, I think, a great way to introduce you to a very specific school that has come to influence me within the Franciscan tradition. So yeah, patreon.com/City of the Immaculata. Check it out. Follow us over there. That's my plug. But for today, we're going to be looking at Triumphantis Hierusalem, the bull by Pope Sixtus V for the promulgation of the Seraphic Doctor, St. Bonaventure, to Doctor of the Church. I wanted to start us off by just doing a little historical sketch to get to get us to this moment when this bull is going to be promulgated and sort of the context around it. We lose Bonaventure quite tragically in the year 1274 and under very mysterious circumstances surrounding the Council of Second Lyons. But the air of sanctity followed him in life as well as in his death. And he was quite immediately recognized as just a colossal figure in those formative decades of the Franciscan order when it was still trying to find its way, trying to find its footing. And I would say, along with St. Thomas Aquinas, who also tragically died on his way to the Council of Second Lyons, and he's recognized as at almost the same time by the church as saint, as a representative in a unique way of his order. And I think with these two men, you have something very unique happening with the Catholic Church. And it's not to say it's a one-to-one comparison. The history of the Dominicans is different than the history of the Franciscans, but these two men are in some ways exemplars of the intellectual tradition and life and holiness within the church as they all sort of come together at this very critical moment. Now, the Franciscans, in their university and their academic capacity, had a much different approach to the transmission of their formative founders than the Dominicans did. And as a result, in the early 14th century, the transmission of Blessed John Duns Scotus takes on a more prominent role in the studiums, and in their somewhat loose commitment to Bonaventure, it's not always stressed the importance of his contribution at that level of among the friars themselves. They're super interested in Blessed John Duns Scotus. You eventually get a school of alchemists as well. And as a result, there's, a little bit of backburnerism with St. Bonaventure at that level. Now, it's a different story at the magisterial level. Bonaventure is consistently, throughout all of this time from his life forward, he's held up by the authority of those churchmen tasked with the guiding the faithful, including theologians, including the friars themselves, and it's very clear who they emphasized. They emphasized St. Bonaventure. Now, Scotus's sanctity was certainly recognized early, and it was maintained by the Franciscan friars. But we're still working hard on getting Blessed John Duns Scotus that magisterial recognition that he deserves, but not so for Bonaventure. And as far as papal recognitions go, well, you have Pope Sixtus IV elevating Bonaventure to a saint in the year 1482. Now, Sixtus was himself a Franciscan, and as we will see in the later bull, Triumphantis Hierusalem, he's dedicated to the teaching and transmission of Bonaventure's thought into the church's dogmatic life. And in a very Bonaventurian way, the goal is never to just stay in the realm of speculative theology. Though this be an important place to begin, we are looking, according to Bonaventure, to be saints, to be good, to be holy. And theology is supposed to be the practical means by which we learn how to become good, how to become holy. So Sixtus IV elevates him. Now, I didn't realize this at first. I just realized as I was getting ready to present this. Let me get my share ready here. I'm going to add, let's see. All right, so this is Superna Celestis, canonizing St. Bonaventure of Bagnoregio, the bull from April 14th, 1482 by Pope Sixtus IV. This is the bull which announces the canonization of Bonaventure to sainthood. But what I noticed was an interesting little thing here. I'm going to tie this in later, the significance of this later. Even way back in 1482, we have Pope Sixtus IV calling Bonaventure the Holy Doctor and Confessor, Bonaventure. And this is interesting. This is, in my opinion, significant. We're not going to I could spend quite a bit of time on this particular bull alone if I wanted to. As you could tell by the title, we're actually going to be spending more time with Triumphantis Hierusalem today. But I did want to bring that to your attention because the title of doctor is a very specific title that I think when people are looking at this, they tend to misunderstand it. It's almost as if like they see a doctor of the church and they think it's like a super saint, right? Like it's a saint plus one or something. But that's not what this is. All that it's really saying when we talk about a doctor is that there's something in the teaching of this particular saint's life that is unique and important to the work of speculative theology. So it helps theologians who work in those realms of dogmatic and speculative theology to know which saints to utilize as exemplars of the specific fields that they're studying. So, for example, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux is the mellifluous doctor. This is a mellifluous. His tongue is very clear and his words are very beautiful. So this tells us, as if you're a theologian out there, that preachers, and yes, preaching is a form of theology since you are giving milk and meat to the faithful so that they too can become holy and live virtuous lives. So a preacher at his study, and he's studying the art and craft of homiletics and preaching, would take an extra special care with Bernard of Clairvaux and utilize him in their efforts to make their homiletics more effective. St. Augustine, he is the Doctor of Grace. So if you're a theologian and you're working in the field of soteriology or ecclesiology, I mean, Doctor of Grace implies a lot. And this is why Augustine is so important in Catholic theological studies. Let's see, St. Alphonsus Liguori, he's known as the Zealous Doctor, I believe. Yeah, Zealous. And I've heard that this one is because, he's his work, he's striving, he's zealous for souls, to win souls for Christ and their salvation. So, theologians in our work, this is what we should be. I'm saying we loosely. This is what theologians should be doing in their work. So we have this long-standing tradition of having in the Latin Church, going way back, in the Wayback Machine. Excuse me, I have to sip some of my wine here. I thought I had some white. I didn't have some white, so you guys know I am drinking my wife's. It's a pink wine. But I wouldn't usually do that, so I give you guys permission to make fun of me. I thought I had some white, but anyways. The Wayback Machine, this tradition goes back with the Latin doctors, at the very least, to the Carolingian dynasty, because there you find this emphasis on 4 Latin doctors. That would be St. Augustine, St. Gregory, Pope St. Gregory the Great, St. Jerome, and St. Ambrose. And you find an emphasis on these particular men in the tradition, moving all the way through the early to the high Middle Ages, where finally in the year 1298, Pope Boniface VIII formally recognizes these men as the 4 Latin doctors of the church. So they have their own specific studies that theologians are working in. Pope Boniface VIII, super important, fascinating pope, and he formalizes this. He formalized a few things, actually. It's kind of an interesting point, but that would be a tangent. As well, you have a tradition specifically in the Western Church. Now, in the East, they were known as the 3 Holy Hierarchs, but in the West, we had a tradition of a sort of counterpoint to the 4 Latin doctors. We also had the 4 Greek doctors. You would find these, if you were in the Carolingian dynasty, men like Alcuin and others, they're making use of these primary sources, the Latin translations of these Greek 4 doctors, which would be Gregory Nazianzen, Saint Athanasius, Saint Basil, and St. John Chrysostom. And they're formally recognized sometime in the 16th century. Now, the idea of adding this comes to the fore at a very unique moment in the church. So I always say, like, kind of keep those 4 Latin doctors and those 4 Greek doctors, kind of like hold them and set them to the side for a moment. We did have this longstanding, like, informal tradition of using them, and then they're sort of formally recognized. But this idea of formally recognizing doctors comes from a moment after the Council of Trent, where Pope Pius V, and he's looking to enact, he was the first post, he was at the end of the Council of Trent, and he's the first post-conciliar pope after the council. So he's looking to enact the conciliar reforms, and among those reforms was the call to form seminaries. The church fathers at Trent realized, and this had been something that reformers had been calling for a long time, that part of the problem with, for example, why Luther was able to do what he did was because there was no real formal system of educating the clergy. Luther was a highly trained man, no doubt about it whatsoever, but the training, the learning was kind of all over the place. So they wanted to consolidate it, to standardize it. Pope Pius V is looking at this, and he sort of seizes the moment, he capitalizes on it, and he elevates St. Thomas Aquinas to this title of doctor as a way to introduce him formally as a theologian who would be taught in these soon-to-come seminaries to help train clergy. So clergy show up, and they're not just like picking and choosing what they're going to read from wherever. They're going to be sitting down and reading St. Thomas in a sort of systematic way. This is the counter-reform, after all, right? This will lead to this new era of learning and study in the church. And he gives Thomas, Pope St. Pius V gives St. Thomas the title of communis, the communist doctor, the common doctor, meaning when you study in theology, Thomas is going to be helpful across many various fields that he touches upon. And sorry, just getting a notification here. Let me block this. All right. And you're to use St. Thomas in the many ways that you are able to use the great common doctor and all of the various fields that he teaches upon. So that's sort of the setup. That's the preliminary moment from Pope St. Pius V, where we're only 23 years later going to come up to Pope Sixtus V, and he is going to declare Bonaventure alongside Thomas as another doctor. Now, bear in mind in all of this, at this point, there's no thought really of continuing to add to this canon. I don't think it was for Pius. I don't believe it was for Sixtus. There's not like the idea that this is going to become a thing doesn't really happen until later, as you start to add more and more of the saints to this list of doctors. But at this time, the real efforts is to formalize which saints theologians will be given as a sort of place of privilege in seminary and in academia and in study. Now, the man who promulgates this is an interesting one himself, Pope Sixtus V. He's among these hardlining, reforming popes that we find in the wake of the Counter-Reformation. Think of Pope Paul IV. Think of Pope Pius V himself. Now, here we have Sixtus. These are not always going to be the most popular men. Reforming men never are. But they're undoubtedly zealous in their desire to root out corruption and error from the church. And you will see this as you read Triumphantis Hierusalem, the emphasis that Pope Sixtus V places on right teaching and proper learning and sanctity and rooting out the error of heretics. So in 1590, he promulgates a bull, Triumphantis Hierusalem, and we're going to work through this bull to see exactly what he's intending to do. And I would hope by the end of it that you guys could see, along with the Latin fathers, along with the Greek fathers, and along with Thomas, Bonaventure really does hold a special place in the church. Because again, remember, now I know that the four Latin doctors had been referred to as doctors. I know that in time the Greek fathers were referred to as doctors. I don't know if Thomas was before his recognition by Pope Pius V. I would imagine he was, but as early as the 15th century in 1482, when Pope Sixtus IV, let me not get my Pope Sixtuses confused here, Pope Sixtus IV recognizes Bonaventure as not a doctor yet, just a saint, but he still says doctor of the church, Bonaventure. So I would imagine at that point it was probably still like more of an informal thing, but it's unique. And Bonaventure is going to hold a special place in the church. So I've got to fix some of this here. Let me get this correct. Bear with me for a second, guys. I'm just going to change this. All right. Now let me see if I can share. Get rid of this. It's awful quiet in the chat tonight. Hope you're all doing well. Triumphantis Hierusalem. Here we go. All right. Triumphantis Hierusalem. St. Bonaventure, Seraphic Doctor of the Church. Pope Sixtus V, 1590. Now, we're not going to read all of it. It's a long document. But I've got some highlights here that I marked. For one, he's going to say, wherefore she greatly studies those things due to that celestial hierarchy, where all are ordered in perfect charity to conform herself to that norm and image, indeed, inasmuch as she is allowed to exile of this passing world. So she, as in the church, greatly studies to conform herself to that norm and image. So the idea here is that at times we, as people that like to study theology, people that have our own particular like little favorite order that we want to emphasize over the others, we can get a little territorial, and it oftentimes comes with a certain denigration of other ideas and other aspects, and a certain wedge being driven between some of these great and holy men and their thoughts, where Sixtus is going to be clear throughout this entire document that the idea here is that the church begins to conform herself to a norm and to an image. Now, I'm going to have to make sure that I'm following my notes correctly. Furthermore, down below, he says, for just as there are many mansions in that great house of the greatest head of a household, heaping with all good things, and just as those blessed souls enjoy a certain wonderful, variegated beatitude of one glory, so the Catholic Church, with this effigy of that one celestial arranged as she is, as a battle line in a military camp, and having been illumined by a divine light, that's a very Bonaventurian acknowledgement there, acknowledges and distinguishes those sacred orders in the veneration that must be exhibited to the saints of God. So he's saying there are many mansions. The Catholic Church allows for these variegated teachers and ideas and schools of thought to exist. Now, for those of you out there that are in the, what are some of the big ones, right? The Molinists or the Suarezians or the Scotists or whatever you may be, right? Like you're one among the many mansions in the Father's house, but the beatitude is of one glory. And we should, as people of the church, be searching towards a oneness of identity while also acknowledging these many mansions. And again, I think I was bringing these up because I do think that there is a tendency among some people to overemphasize the differences between, say, even St. Thomas or St. Bonaventure. And there are some differences between them. I don't doubt that. That's not the point. And I think even in the world of speculative theology, I think it's fine to have a robust exchange of these ideas and these differences, but it should always be first and foremost with the eye of charity. There's a great deal of, I see this on X all the time. There's a lot of irony in the humor of, especially like, say, young zealous people on X. And, I'll see them they're talking about, I think, or even like just today, there is this like blanket condemnations of Gregory Palamas. And I know that gets a little bit more complicated because Gregory Palamas is a little bit more of a tricky one to discuss. But the church has allowed Eastern Catholics to venerate Gregory Palamas. So we have to find some way, without diluting the faith as it is, to also not impose upon our brethren more than the church herself imposes upon them. Okay, let's see. I'm going to try to find there are holy doctors. Where is this at? Okay, right here. Wherefore, by every right are the holy doctors designated in the church with the name of the stars Hades, who in the very frigid winter and with the long nights of infidelity completed and the storm of persecution calmed, they then shone more brightly upon Holy Church after the sun of truth grew warm among the hearts of the faithful, and as the year opened truly more lucidly with a new faith. Where else was I to see? Now, he has got some exceptionally long run-on sentences. I'm going to try to not get too lost into some of these. He does say he seemed to gaze everywhere upon Jesus Christ crucified and suffering, to dwell in his holy wounds, he as in Bonaventure. And I think if you read Bonaventure, this is absolutely 100% correct. We have been working through some of St. Bonaventure's mysticism, and it does seem there's a Christocentrism that permeates, as if like the center of all is Christ, and from a 360-degree purview of the world that Bonaventure has, he sees Christ everywhere as he looks out into the world and studies it. And so when in the study of sacred letters, the reading of the Holy Fathers, and in the very necessary discipline of scholastic theology, having been employed most diligently by Alexander of Hales, the distinguished theologian of that era, for a brief space of time, with the goodness of surpassing genius, by assiduous labor, and what is chief of all, with the grace of the Holy Spirit, who molded him on all sides as a golden vessel for a chosen honor, he made such progress and arrived at such perfection of doctrine that, decorated in solemn custom, the distinctions of a master in theology, and the frequented lecture halls of Paris. He taught sacred theology publicly at the same space. So in the study of sacred letters, and that would be the study of scriptures and the study of all the church fathers, and in the necessary discipline of scholastic theology, of which he was a key member, he arrived at a perfection of doctrine. Bonaventure himself arrives. Let me see if I can. A perfection of doctrine. Strong words from the Holy Father there. Further, truly did he attain such great praise in the gift of interpreting and in the science of all theology that the most learned men admired his doctrine and erudition. And indeed, there are extant many moving and very bright writings of this holy man, which are of great utility to the church and are not mediocre, by the benefice of God, every one of which both erudite men of our age and ages past have read with much fruit and very entirely approved. So great was he in theology that they declared him sufficient. For he left those monuments of his divine genius to those who would come after him, by which questions very difficult and involuted with many obscurities are explained methodically and in order, straightforwardly and lucidly, with a great bounty of the best arguments. The truth of the Catholic faith is illustrated, pernicious errors and profane heresies are overthrown, and the pious minds of the faithful are admirably inflamed to the love of God and the desire of the celestial fatherland. So we have several things here. The most learned men, those men who are the most able in the fields of theology, admire Bonaventure and admire his doctrine. And those who have read him have read with much fruit and very entirely approved. So these men, these learned men, these capable men, they're reading Bonaventure, they're producing good fruits in their reading of Bonaventure, and everything that they're reading is entirely approved. Now, you do have to take that, like not every saint is going to have every single thing that they say accepted by the church, but when we're speaking about a theologian of this order, of this magnitude, we can say, loosely speaking, that their entire corpus is accepted. At the very least, is accepted as being fruitful. And then the questions which he's looking at. This is very important because remember, this is all for those of you guys that have been following me. I know I'm recently streaming on X. I don't know how much you guys have been following me on all of this stuff. We've been talking about these things for a long time. We're working through the Middle Ages on this channel. Several of my previous lectures, we talked about the origins of the universities and what they're dealing with and the reason that they're asking the questions that they're asking, where these questions are coming from. And the questions at times are quite difficult. And there's a tendency to want to think of them as arcane. We're sort of past it at this point. It's a great misreading of the questions that these men are asking. But the questions are difficult, and to sort of penetrate them and the significance of them and why they're still so very important to us, we need men like Bonaventure, who takes these very difficult questions with many obscurities, and he explains them. And you read Bonaventure, even especially in his systematic work, it's methodical, it's placed incredibly orderly. I would say he in some ways, these are fighting words, but I would say he in some ways surpasses even Thomas here. They're certainly straightforward and lucid, and with a great bounty of the best arguments, the truth of the Catholic faith is illustrated. So he's heaping some high praise across a wide range of things that we're saying here. Let's see, further down here, For there was in St. Bonaventure something preeminent and unique, so that he stood out not only in subtlety of arguing and the facility of teaching and the cleverness of defining, but he excelled in a certain divine strength of thoroughly stirring up souls. Amen. This has certainly been the case of my own reading of Bonaventure. I've been thoroughly moved by my readings, even in his more systematic treatments of subjects. There's a certain soul to them that you sometimes maybe would find lacking in some of the other scholastic writers. Let's see here. Moreover, when Gregory X, this would have been the Pope when Bonaventure was alive, the Supreme Pontiff, on account of the most grave situation of the Christian Republic, had proclaimed the General Council of Lyons and searched eagerly for men outstanding in sanctity, doctrine, and wisdom, whose strong and faithful works he would use for managing and arranging of this greatest matter. He chose first of all two of the clearest lights of that age from the two most flourishing orders of preachers and of minors, Saints Thomas and Bonaventure, whom he commanded to come in person. And it's one of the great tragedies of history that we lost both of those men at that council, and they weren't able to. Bonaventure saw the council through, but it's just one of those, like, you throw your hands up in the air sometimes trying to figure out God's providence. Undoubtedly, though, they became strong intercessors, certainly. Let's see. For indeed, in the most arduous matters of the council, this would have been Second Lyons, this is what he was doing there. He performed uncommon tasks, defended the Catholic faith most constantly, refuted depraved opinions most sharply, and by whose patience, doctrine, sanctity, and orations, the pastoral solicitude of the Pontiff Gregory was so greatly aided that with the disagreement of the schismatics removed by the mercy of God, Michael Palaeologus, Emperor of the Greeks, and the Oriental nations returned to the obedience, unity, and communion of the Apostolic See. And at last it was worthy to have him, whom in Greek they call Eutychius. Now, let me go down a little bit further here. I might need to do a search here. I'm looking for Sixtus. Does anybody see Sixtus in here? I'll just read it. I can't find it on the page, but I'll just read what I got. Clipped it earlier. Sixtus, our predecessor, surveying them from the sublime watchtower of the Apostolic See, understood that the finger of God, who alone works great wonders, was plainly there. And so both of his own and at the very many vehement requests of Frederick, Emperor of the Romans, of good memory, of kings, republics, dukes, and cities, of urgent demanding consent of nearly all the faithful, the Roman pontiff had the worthy idea of registering that most outstanding man, Cardinal Bishop Bonaventure, among the saints. Okay, so that we're talking about now, how he was recognized. He is in the Pope, urges us to consider how to rather propagate and explain his sanctity to the greater extent his doctrine as much as we are able. And finally, I'm going to search it, see if I can find where I am. Okay. Finally, the utility of the universal church moves us, which can always more and more richly captivated by the erudition of such a doctor, especially when the ambushes and the diabolical machinations of heretics by which they oppose most vehemently in this sad age that sacred theology, which is called scholastic. The reformers there despised scholastic theology, admonish us greatly that we should retain, explain, and propagate this same theology. To heck with the heretics, as something which nothing can be more fruitful for the Church of God. For with the divine gift of him who alone gives the spirit of knowledge and wisdom and understanding, and who furnishes his church throughout the lifetime and generations, as indeed with the new benefits, and who provides her with new support, there has been discovered by our ancestors, most wise men, scholastic theology, which by two doctors, this is important here, which by two doctors, glorious above all, the angelic St. Thomas and the seraphic St. Bonaventure, most brilliant professors in this capacity, and first among those who have been recognized among the number of saints. Now, I do believe that this is the passage in Aeterni Patris that Pope Leo XIII is going to quote from this passage. So Leo XIII, Aeterni Patris, he is talking about the revitalization of study in the schools of Catholic learning after they had been decimated by the French Revolution. And he's calling for the seminaries to take up again St. Thomas. And then he draws again from this bull, which quotes here, to call upon and study the most wise men of scholastic theology, the two doctors, glorious above all, the angelic St. Thomas and the seraphic St. Bonaventure, as the two primary men that we're supposed to turn to in our study of theology. So all of you people out there who are spending your time studying Thomas and studying all of the commentators, you do yourself a great disservice by ignoring Bonaventure in that, because the church has clearly placed these two men on a unique level among these scholastic thinkers. So let's see. Let me see here. Try to find the next one. Man, there's just some long paragraphs here. This Holy Father likes his long sentences. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything in that one in particular that I want to point out. I do want to get to something very important towards the end. Okay, so we're getting towards the end here, and this is what he says. Now remember, context first. This is after the Council of Trent. And there's this call from the church fathers that we need to have sort of standardized learning for our training our clergy, training our religious. So the first thing that Pope Pius V does is he elevates Thomas to Doctor of the Church. And when you enter seminary, you're going to be studying Thomas. Now, Sixtus here calls for a college by the name of St. Bonaventure, in which sacred theology, especially from the works and commentaries of this exceptional and devout doctor, is to be explained. And he's calling for this college to be built in the city. And what this is eventually going to become, it starts in the Basilica of the 12 Holy Apostles, which is the Basilica of the Franciscans in Rome. And then it eventually becomes the Seraphicum, the College of Seraphic Doctor, St. Bonaventure, which is, to this day, if you're going to go and study really solid Orthodox Franciscan theology, this would be the place. This is where, for example, where Maximilian Kolbe received one of his doctorates, and it's just a really solid place. And it's actually, this is where it originates from this call here from Pope Sixtus, calling upon the church to form this. Okay. Well, I think that's good enough. There's quite a bit here. I mean, we could go on. I think that would be good for now. All right. Still a few of you here. Didn't lose you guys with all that. Hope you enjoy that. I know it's quite a bit going through a papal bull from the 16th century, 17th century. So what are the things that he's doing here? The very first thing, of course, that he's doing with that bull is recognizing St. Bonaventure as a doctor of the church, to be studied, not just studied, but also venerated among those preeminent doctors, which at this time there were 9, 4 Latin doctors, 4 Greek doctors, St. Thomas, and now we would be adding the 10th, St. Bonaventure. So it's a very elite club at this point among the saints. It's still a very elite club, but even more so in this time. And we're equating the status of Bonaventure in this bull to that of St. Thomas Aquinas as the primary doctors of scholastic theology. He's calling for the recognition of the importance of Bonaventure's writings. Bonaventure's, that would be his commentaries, his theological works, his mystical works. All of these things are, as he said, they're methodically laid out, the order of them, the way that they penetrate the complexity of the questions, and that they shine a divine light upon the errors of heresy, and the way that they inflame the minds of their readers. It's also, broadly speaking, the bull is a defense of scholastic theology, which was under attack at this point by the Reformation, and even some within the Catholic Church who had sort of, and the rise of the humanist movement turned against scholastic theology. One thing that the humanists and the Protestants all agreed on was that they all hated scholastic theology. So this is a magisterial recognition of the importance of scholasticism. And then it's a clarion call for you guys who like to study theology to turn to Bonaventure as one of the core teachers in this thing that we call the Catholic faith. You should be reading, even, let's say, for example, when you go and you turn to St. Augustine, you don't have to just navigate the massive amount of St. Augustine's corpus on its own. You could also read St. Augustine in the light of St. Bonaventure, which is, for example, what Pope Benedict XVI did. He was, in many respects, a Augustinian Bonaventurian theologian. So he's calling for the propagation of it. And then he's just calling for a general veneration and recognition of St. Bonaventure. And I can only speak for myself. You guys who know this channel know I've given a lot of time to Bonaventure here. Some of you may even think it's an inordinate amount of time. I have purposely, I never wanted to seem like I prioritize Bonaventure over Scotus because of anything I have particularly against Scotus. That's not the case. I actually think Blessed John Duns Scotus is in many ways the preeminent Bonaventurian Thomist theologian, but that would be a conversation for another day. But I do, drawing from the call of the church to prioritize St. Bonaventure, try to make it a point to place him and the emphasis that we give on this channel towards him, and largely in the hopes that I can get you guys reading him more and studying him more. You know, I've been doing a series on the Tree of Life. Some of those videos are out on YouTube now. Some of them are still over on Patreon. But, you know, I think it's undeniable at this point the magisterium has directed the dogmatic. So, like, I actually am going to be getting, hopefully in the next few days, weeks, or whatever, I'm going to have some people come onto the channel that we're going to discuss this and at length. So I don't want to like kind of like lose all that steam by getting too deep into it right here. But there is a debate within Franciscanism about, is it actually a unified school? You know, in many ways, the Dominican school is just Thomas and then tradition of commentary on Thomas. And then the Jesuits, they just kind of picked up Thomas and ran with it and gave it their own spin. But the Franciscans had Bonaventure, they had Blessed John Duns Scotus, and they had William of Ockham. Now, certainly William of Ockham, I think it's safe to say, while influential, is a break with the traditional like school of Franciscan theology. So I think that's a fair demarcation. But the real controversy lies between Bonaventure and Scotus and how much they align. And people get sometimes quite upset with me because my approach to this, and I'm coming to this through the lens of Father Peter Fellner, who I was told recently by a person who describes himself as a fanatic, told me that, you know, that this is just a revisionist history. And in some sense, I mean, all history is revisionist history. I've got some talks on here on revisionist history. Revisionist history is not necessarily a bad thing. But there's always been, in the school of Franciscanism, there's an emphasis on Blessed John Duns Scotus all throughout from his time up until really the French Revolution, when everything kind of fell apart. And that has been at times clearly to the detriment of Bonaventurian studies. But I think we have to, one, demarcate between that and what the magisterium has asked for. As well, I think we have to demarcate between what I'm perfectly fine with, which are theologians who are dedicated to just the study of St. Bonaventure or just the study of Blessed John Duns Scotus. You shouldn't be reading William of Ockham, though. He's a waste of time. But that's a different conversation than when we're reading these magisterial documents, for example. The whole idea there is we're trying to shore up the foundation, the faith foundation that we all stand on. And that can feel a little wobbly to some people at times. And so you want to have sure footing. And the way that you have sure footing is in clear, precise, and correct dogmatic theology. So you can have your little like speculative studies of Bonaventure or Thomas or Scotus or whomever. But that's a different thing than trying to add to our symbolic theology, which is what we all should be. I say we loosely, like most of us aren't really going to have much of an effect on these things, but it's what we, as the collective we, should be focused on, which is trying to bring the truth to the full light of day so that we can help people become holy. This was St. Maximilian Kolbe's reading on the Franciscan tradition. We're going to talk about, if you guys have noticed the next series of lives that I have come out, it's a lot of Franciscan stuff. Next time, what is it next? Oh, next we're going to be doing the absolute primacy of Christ and Mary. Speaking of Scotus, we're going to be doing after that. I've got one called Scotus and Kant in Dialogue, which I'm excited for. And then after that, I've got one called The Golden Thread of Franciscanism. And that one is going to be like primarily focused on the golden thread, which is this theme that St. Maximilian Kolbe identified that stretches across the entire Franciscan order, which unites the order, which is the main thing that the magisterium has asked of us. Because the whole idea, I mean, yes, there are many mansions, and they mention this in the bull. Pope Sixtus mentions this in the bull. There are many mansions in the house, but that's like a gift, right? The fact that we have like a multitude of orders and schools in the Catholic Church is a gift that the Church gives to us. We don't have to have that. You don't really find that, for example, in the Eastern Orthodox. The Eastern Orthodox, basically as it exists today, is just commentary on Palamas, or at best, the three holy hierarchs. And they see the faith as this, like, that's all that you're allowed to have. And the fact that we have this diverse array of schools, to them, they see that as like chaos. So it's a gift. And the Church allows us, those of us that are within the bounds of the faith, to sort of work with our schools. But the idea isn't like it's not just the whole idea of speculative theology is not just to do speculative theology until the of course, until the end of time. But like, it's not this like thing that's just going to be in perpetuity forever, right? Like, there is going to be a consummation of all things eventually. And we're trying to like work towards the building of the kingdom. So this idea of like these schools just perpetually being in a speculative state, one, it is a gift, but two, it's not necessarily something that the Church has to give us. The Church at any moment could dogmatically define certain propositions that right now they give the schools liberty to discuss. So I do want to end with just one more thing here. Let me stop sharing that. Is this what I think it is? Yes. Okay, so is it from who I think it is? Yes. All right. From the Holy See, this is a message from the Holy Father Francis on the occasion of the exhibition of El Libro e lo Spirito, on the Book and the Spirit, at the Vatican Apostolic Library on the 750th anniversary of the deaths of Saints Bonaventure and St. Thomas. And somewhere in here, what did I see that the Holy Father said? He said, I think it's this paragraph. In this sense, the common doctor and the seraphic doctor constitute valuable company for every pilgrim walking towards Christ, tracing a path described by the former as a way of intelligence enlightened by faith, by the second as an itinerary of the mind, which from contemplation of creation rises towards God. Think of the Trinitarian view St. Bonaventure proposes towards creatures and their relations, with an integration between the holiness of intelligence and the intelligence of holiness, which emerges, first of all, from the example of their life. And I think there was one other thing. He does actually make note of Pope Sixtus V's the document the bull we're looking at today, as well as Aeterni Patris. They associated them, as in Bonaventure and Thomas, with the two olive trees and the two lampstands which stand before the Lord of the earth. Indeed, they continue today to represent the sources of light and inspiration for the church and for culture. They are luminaries for an approach to knowledge, and in particular to theology, in which the intellectual depth and spiritual life, science and wisdom, humility and charity interpenetrate and mutually enrich one another in the willingness not to keep the fruits of speculation for oneself, but to share them with generous pastoral and missionary zeal. So very strong words again from the magisterium about the sort of preeminence of these two holy men. I thought you guys would like that, just a sort of a wrap up. Again, very quiet in the chat today, so if I have nothing else to add to the conversation, then I will just call it an evening. Appreciate you guys watching. God bless. I will see you next time. Be sure to check out the Patreon. Be sure to subscribe over there for only, $5 a month. You will be getting all of the series on the errors of orthodoxy. I've just recently found out that if you're on Apple, there's like a surcharge of like an extra $2. So I apologize about that, but trying to only make it $5 a month for you guys. But besides that, that's all I had for you. So God bless you all. Take care, and I will see you next time.
Honey, their coffee can't hold a candle to yours.
Instant Folgers taste good as fresh perked.
This is Earth, the year 2100. This is the headquarters of Space Patrol. And men from Earth, Mars, and Venus live and work there as guardians of peace.
In the nation's capital, President Johnson today welcomed British Prime Minister Douglas Hume.